Will it be a winter of hope or a winter of despair? As the all-important winter session of Parliament begins, the big question that we are raising here on this very special edition is, will Parliament function? And will the government and opposition be able to break the logjam, or will economic reforms pay a price for politics yet again? And most importantly, will GST be stuck once again, or will this game-changing reform finally sail through the political logjam? To discuss the reforms and the headwinds that exist, we have three very, very special guests. Professor Meghnad Desai, Dr. Arvind Virmani and Dilip Padgaonkar joining us right here on this very special show. Thanks, gentlemen, each one of you for being with us. I'd like to start this show with you, Professor Desai, because you have the advantage of being a global insider as far as India is concerned. We've seen a monsoon washout. Do you expect yet another washout as far as the winter session is concerned? Realistically speaking, do you expect Parliament to function over the next 1 month or so?
No, I don't expect Parliament to function over the next month or so, because since the last washout, new issues have been raised. There have been new debates and disagreements. Congress and the opposition is more confident since Bihar, so they don't need to cooperate at all. And I think in the meantime, the government hasn't done enough to maintain a dialogue, open a dialogue. And I think so. The government is learning how to operate. So I think we'll have to give the winter session a miss.
All right, that's a very candid view that's coming in. No ifs, no buts. You'll have to give the winter session a miss is the word that's coming in from Professor Meghnad Desai. Dr. Virmani, if I may throw this one at you. You've seen many sessions, whether it's winter, monsoon or the budget. Is it safe to presume here that the winter session is perhaps going to meet the same fate that the monsoon session did?
Well, I think we have to keep in mind that there are two different issues here. One is physically stopping Parliament from functioning by going into the well of the House. In my personal view, that is against democracy, and I hope somebody takes a PIL to the SC on that. As far as voting and all is concerned, because as you everybody knows, GST is the most critical thing and most critical legal change, and it requires a constitutional amendment. So of course parties would be free to vote against it. So here it's not clear to me that Congress by itself can stop that by happening. Obviously the government must reach out to the Congress as well as to the other opposition parties, and I am not as categorical or confident that it will be a total washout. So though it's a wild guess, I have no better information than Lord Desai, but I would give it a 50-50 chance.
You'd give it a 50-50 chance. Professor Meghnad Desai believes it's going to be a washout. Dilip Padgaonkar, you understand the politics of it all, and let me be very candid with you when I say, like Professor Desai was saying, much has changed. The reality today is that the government is going into the session after being drubbed in Bihar, and the opposition is going headlong into the session after, almost galvanized, almost spirited. The political realities seem to have changed between the monsoon session to the winter session. Is that one of the reasons why we perhaps will see very little or perhaps no work happen in winter session?
Well, the debacle in Bihar is certainly one of the factors, as Meghnad Desai just said. But beyond that, there is something else which to me is a basic factor, and which is that Mr. Narendra Modi continues to run with the hair of development, investment, etc., but also he continues to hunt with the hound of Hindutva. The two can't go together. But the time has come when a decision has to be taken by the Prime Minister in which direction he wants to go, because even after the debacle in Bihar, you've had several other instances where the Prime Minister has been either unable or unwilling to stop some of his own people from saying some very nasty things about the minorities. And this is nothing to do with fringe elements. You've had in the past 2 weeks people holding constitutional positions as governors of the state of Assam and of the state of Tripura, making statements which are a blatant violation both of their responsibilities as well as of the spirit of the Constitution which they're supposed to abide by. So the government says it is willing to hold a discussion on the issue of intolerance in Parliament. I believe that the opposition ought to be present and debate this question threadbare, because on all sides there's been a great deal of rhetoric, a great deal of emotion, but very, very little of cool, calculated, reasoned debate. So I stand somewhere between the two speakers that preceded me. I believe at least on this question of intolerance, there ought to be a debate. The debate must be attended by the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister must address the issues that the opposition has laid. Otherwise, I'm afraid that the Rajya Sabha tail will continue to wag the Lok Sabha dog.
All right, the tail will continue to wag the Lok Sabha dog. Just hold your thoughts there, because I'm going to get in Professor Desai into this entire discussion there. Professor Desai, from where you see things, and like you rightly pointed out, the political realities seem to have changed. Dilip Padgaonkar has rightly pointed out there is an intolerant debate, and the opposition is going to go gung-ho and would want that debate to be center stage. Has the government of the day been too arrogant, or do you believe the opposition has been far too obstructionist?
I think there are two things. The government is still a learning government because there are not enough experienced parliamentarians in it, and they really have to learn to do deals and make compromises. The opposition, because it used to be in the government, cannot believe that it can be in opposition. So they are just being completely obstructionist. And I think every 3 months there will be another excuse to stop it. So I think this will continue. I think we're in a very interesting stalemate, which points out the limits of the Indian Constitution, that, until now there was a single party dominance. So majority in a Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha did not matter. Now it matters because another party is in power, and that party can't manage just by majority. I mean, we really may have to improve parliamentary behavior, norms of parliament, may have a code of conduct perhaps. But until that happens, we will continue like this.
All right, until that happens, we will continue like this. Let me just quickly get in Dilip Padgaonkar back into this discussion. And Mr. Padgaonkar, do you believe Bihar verdict has sharpened this political divide, has actually widened the wedge that existed between the Treasury and the opposition benches? And we're going to see a lot of that play out in the winter session?
Certainly, I think it has widened the differences between the Treasury benches and the opposition benches. But what I fear most is that, other than issues such as GST, which are important for the economy, there has been another issue that has emerged and which calls for urgent attention, and which is the degrading security environment worldwide as a result of the ISIS terror attacks in different parts of the world. We've had security experts speak about it and say how much this danger of ISIS terrorism is of the utmost importance to India. Now, here is something I would also want to be debated in Parliament. I've not heard a single party in the opposition, and I've not heard a single party of the NDA even refer to this issue, which is of urgent concern. So right now, I think, rhetoric really has taken the lead over things that are important. And among the important things, I repeat, particularly after the terror attacks in Beirut, and in Paris, in Turkey, and over the Sinai Desert, this is something that we'll have to look at urgently, look at carefully. The Defense Minister has spoken about this up to a point when he gave a statement the other day regarding huge dangers in cyberspace. Now, this is something of concern to me. So the economy on the one hand and security on the other are the two major urgent things that require to be discussed, and I'm afraid that this is not going to happen.
You're afraid this is not going to happen, but Arvind Virmani, let me really bring this to you because an evening after, Arun Jaitley said that he's not really going to dilute the key tenets of the GST bill. You had the former Finance Minister P. Chidambaram take to Twitter and say that the confrontational speech of the Finance Minister on GST is not the best way to reach out to the opposition. I'm going to keep this really big picture before I move on to the GST, and which is why, Dr. Virmani, if I may ask you, do you believe the government needs to be a lot more conciliatory? We are seeing two of the big giants of the main opposition and the Treasury benches really spar over whether they are being conciliatory or not. Do you believe, given the realities and given the fact that the government needs, the Rajya Sabha to function, should the government go out of its way in being conciliatory, something perhaps that it really has not been in letter and spirit?
I'm a bit puzzled by this distinction between the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Because if I recall the last session, the Lok Sabha was not allowed to function because certain parties went into the well of the House and refused physically to let it function. I mean, that's a completely different issue. How can we have a democracy and a parliament which is physically stopped from discussing issues, whatever they are? That's my one point. The second point, I often point out a statement or words which are attributed to President Clinton, and he's supposed to have had on his desk a sign saying, "Is the economy stupid?" You know, the world is in turmoil, the global economy projections have repeatedly been put down, and here we are willing to discuss everything under the sun, but we are not able to or willing to discuss economics, we are not willing to discuss economic laws. There are tens of them which are on the agenda. Fine, if a party opposes the X bill or the Y bill, go and vote against it. But to say that we have the right to stop the parliament from functioning, I think it's absurd. And I would be very amazed to see neutral intellectuals who don't have a political axe to grind to support this kind of way of operating.
All right, just hold your thoughts there because I will want to get in Professor Desai back into this discussion. Let's really shift the focus to economics and economy really because it isn't really stupid. And Professor Desai, if I may ask you, where does the onus for economic reforms lie? Does it rest solely with the government of the day or does it actually lie with the opposition as well? And isn't there a lot of political grandstanding that's happening on the part of the Congress party as well? I mean, some of the reforms that they're now stalling, they've actually been key authors of. The GST is just one example.
This is the way parliamentary games are played in India, that the opposition always opposes on the floor of the House. Deals are struck outside the House, away from the cameras, and then some kind of compromise is done. This would happen in the Telangana bill, on the Lokpal bill when UPA was in power. I think this time around, I think the opposition is refusing to make any deals because they're still angry that they lost. And their power is to make parliament stop from functioning. And I think, what Arvind Virmani said is quite right. Economy may be important, even security may be important, as Dilip said, but that is not the way the parliamentarians think. They think they want to stop these guys from ruling because they don't like them. And I think, this sort of farce will continue for a while. But, ultimately the executive can do things without recourse to parliament. Okay, we won't get GST for another year. But, that is life. That is the price of a non-functioning parliament. But then the government has to go on doing other things about reform and get on with the economy and with the security. They can't expect parliament to cooperate. I don't expect parliament to behave at all.
There are two takeaways from what you just said. One, of course, is executive decisions, and should that be key? And the other, of course, is that the deals are not being struck. Let's take them one by one. And Dilip, if I may ask you to come into this discussion, he's absolutely right. I mean, there is a political grandstanding that happens in the floor of the House, and then outside, they backslap each other, deals get struck, they break bread together, and things get sorted out. What is perhaps not happening in this Parliament, in the 15th Lok Sabha and in this session and the previous session, is that there is such bitter opposition on both sides with each other. There is such bitter obstructionism. It almost seems to be personal. And is that why deals are not being struck even on key economic legislation?
Well, you know, how can you strike any kind of deal when there is such heated rhetoric from both sides? For example, I hear that after today's meeting between the senior leaders of the BJP has decided to be extremely aggressive in the winter session. And by being extremely aggressive, I mean they're going to go in for a tit for tat in every way, whether it's on the issue of growing intolerance or any other issue. Now, is it a coincidence, for example, that suddenly the BJP leaders say that we might as well examine Subramaniam Swamy's charge regarding the British nationality of Rahul Gandhi? Suddenly you have again, after weeks of silence, the whole Robert Vadra issue coming up again. So these things don't happen if there is a possibility of a deal. So I am personally extremely pessimistic. I don't think any deals have taken place. And therefore, as I said, we'll have to wait for the opening 2 or 3 days of the session to find out whether once they let off steam on the issue of intolerance, they'll get down to discussing issues pertaining to the economy on the one hand and to security on the other.
Fair point indeed, and you're right that the rhetoric is very, very sharp, and it's actually also very personal, to tell you the truth. But Dr. Virmani, if I may come to you, and this whole debate that we keep having in India, a lot of people say, let's go on with the executive decisions, and let's not chase the big legislative decisions. Parliament will function when it will, but let's get the executive decisions speeded up, and let's get those expedited. Do you believe Parliament can actually be kept at bay? I mean, do you believe we do not need the big bang legislative decisions that the Parliament alone can deal with? Because executive decisions really amount to a tinkering here and a tinkering there. They will not bring in the second generation of the structural reforms that we perhaps need in India today.
So the first thing to recall is it's not just the GST. I think another important piece of legislation is the bankruptcy law. Actually, the bankruptcy portions of the law should have been in the corporate tax thing which the Congress passed. What I heard from many people who are kind of involved in that was that there was supposed to be a bankruptcy portion in that law, but for some reason, because of hurry or something, they wanted to pass it quickly and it all got left out. That is highly unfortunate. But as you say, there is a certain number of things you can do administratively on this whole bad debt issue, but eventually to have a sustainable system of bad debt management, you've got to have a bankruptcy law. So absolutely right, but the issue is really of sustainability. The way I look at structural and institutional reform, some of them of course are necessary for themselves, like the GST. If you want to discuss, we can discuss that. But many others are really to ensure sustainability. Because, you know, I have seen many campaigns. You have a big campaign, you seem to repair everything. Everything is great for a year or two, and then it all goes back to the same way it was 3 years before. And it's for that reason you need to make these legal or structural and institutional changes.
Hold your thoughts there, and let's really shift the focus to the GST, because that is really the big game changer that's going to be discussed in the winter session of Parliament. Hopefully, we'll see the light of day finally after so many years. Professor Desai, if I may bring you into this discussion, do you realistically expect a toning down of possessions on both sides, both by the Congress, who claim they were the original authors of the GST, and by the BJP, who finally want the GST to go through? And there seem to be some signals that they're willing to give and take a little. Do you expect toning down of positions, realistically speaking, on one of India's most ambitious tax reforms, that's the GST?
I don't think it will happen yet. I think it will take one more session before it happens. I think people are still scoring points against each other. As I said before, Congress is especially very gung-ho, having got a victory in Bihar. And, I think they clearly don't see that whatever may have happened in Bihar, the BJP is still going to be in power at this point for another 3.5 years, but they don't see why they should be helpful. And I can understand their frustration. They were used to governing, they're no longer governing, and so they don't want to cooperate. Now, I think, in a sense, for me, what is interesting is that it is showing that the parliamentary procedures are very inadequate in India. And I work in another parliament where we have codes of conduct and conventions which are obeyed by all sides. I think there are no such codes of conduct which are enforceable in Indian parliament. And I think the Indian public ought to realize that their parliament is not functioning. And I think it is dramatically not functioning, and it is not functioning not because of backbench revolt, but because organized opposition leaders leading the revolt. So I think it's a very good way for India to understand
Right.
that there has to be really radical reform of Parliament, debated by the civil society and by everybody outside
Right.
politics, because politics is not performing.
All right, politics is not performing and nor is the parliament. Dr. Virmani, I still want to keep it with the GST. The two big bones of contention seem to be the 1% additional levy and the dispute resolution, mechanism. If those two were to go through, and if those two were to be aborted, we still have no confirmation whether they will or not, but the government is seriously rethinking at least the 1% additional levy to be aborted. Do you still believe that the GST can then be negotiated with the Congress party, or is this political grandstanding and perhaps nothing else?
So very quickly, clearly the 1% levy, no economist supports. It was purely a kind of practical compromise. But I think more importantly, it's very important for people to understand there are really two parts to this whole thing. One is the constitutional amendment, which takes certain taxes which are in the first list, like service tax, the central list, and the third list, the states list, and combines them into a single tax in the middle. It's very important that the constitutional amendment do this in a neat, clean way. The second part of it, which will be the actual GST bill, which will lay out, which can, in principle, lay out everything else. And I think it's very important that the first part be clean and sustainable. If we have disputes, whether on dispute resolution, etc., they should be discussed at the stage of the GST bill. It can be done. There can be compromises. But I think it would be a serious mistake, I'm speaking as an economist, to put such non-economic and I would frankly say silly constraints into that GST amendment, the constitutional amendment bill. That would be my great concern as somebody who's involved with this issue for 15 years. We have been struggling with this for the last 10 years. I have had my own proposals. I have seen these discussed in the center with different governments, with different states, with tens of committees, and it's it's very strange for me to hear people saying that this has not been discussed or that has been discussed. It's been discussed ad nauseum over the last 15 years. So
right.
Anyway, I can understand the politics, but keep that into the bill. Don't put that into the constitution.
All right, keep the politics away from the Constitutional Amendment Bill. I'm itching to take this to Dilip Padgaonkar, but one more question to you, Professor Desai. Would you rather have India wait for a more mature GST bill than one being done in a rush between the opposition and the government, a give and take here, a give and take there, a half-baked legislation like Dr. Virmani is pointing out? Would you rather have India wait for that game-changing reform?
I think India should wait. After all, we've been waiting for this bill for 15 years. There are no trains running away. We managed without the GST to have 8.5–9% growth rate. So I don't think we should make a fetish of GST. It will happen when it will happen. And I think in the meantime, the government should get along and do lots of other things which it has to do. Obviously, as Arvind Virmani was saying, some reform like the bankruptcy law require legislation. But without legislation, there are lots of things the government can do, and they should just realize that the parliament is not going to work. That's the price of democracy. You pay it and you get along.
All right, that's the price of democracy to be paid. Dilip Padgaonkar, I'll let you have the last word in this entire debate. Let's just take this away from the GST or the bankruptcy law and the individual reforms that we are talking about. And more than anything else, reforms are a signal that we send to the investor community, are a signal that we send to the rest of the world. Many people believe with a winter washout, the signal will be that the reform drive has been derailed, and that will be yet another headwind to companies that are reeling under poor earnings, to an economy that's still saddled with very, very slow pace of growth. Do you agree with this assessment that this is going to be a derailed reform drive and is indeed going to send out a very wrong signal?
Well, first and foremost, I agree with my fellow panelists that a weak GST is worse than no GST at all. So we must wait for a better political environment to get the kind of GST the country needs. Now, on the other issue that you raised, my feeling is that once again, Mr. Narendra Modi has been telling investors and governments abroad that major reforms, economic reforms, are on the anvil. The question they've been asking all this while is, when are you going to deliver on these reforms? And if the winter session of Parliament is a washout, which is likely to be, then the signal really will be that Mr. Modi's authority, Mr. Modi's writ, doesn't really run. And that is by far the worst thing that can happen to a Prime Minister. He's been making those promises. He's been very focused on a certain number of issues. But if he's unable to deliver, then there is going to be a big problem regarding the very credibility of the Prime Minister. Now, is there no other way out? I believe at least on a couple of other things, maybe that the government can reach out to the opposition parties. For example, there's no earthly reason why two or three other bills important for the economic reforms can't be just left to the state. The land acquisition bill is one. The legislation related to labor is another. Now, if these things figure on the concurrent list or on the state lists, why just not allow the states to handle it the way they think fit? Because this will again be in line with Mr. Modi's very keen and very correct desire to have a more federal approach to politics and to economics. But I'm afraid that if nothing happens, if it's a washout, then the big casualty, I think, will be the credibility of Narendra Modi.
All right. My panel here fears it is indeed going to be a washout. The opposition is coming all galvanized after Bihar. There will be a spirited opposition, and the government, like they are rightly pointing out, they are not going to take this lying down and are perhaps far from being conciliatory. They want to be aggressive. They want to give it back to the opposition. At the stake will, of course, be India's big economic legislations and the game-changing reforms that India has been waiting for many, many years now. Thanks very much, gentlemen. Professor Desai, Dr. Virmani, and Mr. Padgaonkar for being with us. And for you viewers, stay tuned to ET Now. We continue to get you news and analysis that matters. Thanks very, very much for tuning in.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.